of Management Studies, IGNOU presents an audiobook on the course MMPC-001 Management Functions and Organizational Processes for MBA program. Presenting Block 4, Organizational Processes. Unit-11, Organization Communication Processes, Part-1.
Organization communication processes. After completing this unit, you should be able to understand the meaning and purpose of communication, the process of communication, the media and channels of organizational communication, the intentional or unintentional barriers that prevent organizational communication to be effective, and what a manager should do to make his communication effective. Communication meaning and purpose. Communication refers to sharing of ideas, facts, opinions, information, and understanding. Simply stated, communication can be said to be the passing of information and understanding from one person to another. It will be seen that there are at least three elements involved here: the sender at one end, the receiver at the other, and in between is the message or information that is to be passed on from one end to the other. The information is passed from the sender to the receiver, and the knowledge of its effects is passed from the receiver to the sender in the form of a feedback. Whether the effect produced is the desired one will depend upon how well the receiver understands the meaning of the information. Communication can therefore be aptly said to be the transmission of meaning. Importance of communication. One of the important roles of the manager is the informational role, wherein a manager seeks information from his peers, subordinates, and others about anything related to their jobs and responsibilities. At the same time, a disseminator of information about job and the organization to those who are concerned with it. As such, a considerable part of time is devoted to receiving or disseminating information that is in communication inside or outside the organization. Some of the studies made in the USA show that between 40 to 60% of the work time in a typical manufacturing plant is involved in some phases of communication. Further, the top and middle level managers typically devote 60 to 80% of their total working hours to communicating. According to Peter Drucker, good communication is the foundation for sound management. The managerial functions of planning, organizing, directing, and controlling depend on communication in an enterprise. For planning to be realistic, it is essential that it is based on sound information, which is not possible without a good system of communication existing in an enterprise. The latest developments in the market may not be communicated to the planners, making their future plans totally meaningless. Adaptation to external environment on which rests the survival of the business may not be possible without good communication. Again, in order to reach the objectives, it is necessary that leadership is exercised, decisions made, efforts coordinated, people motivated, and operations controlled. Each of these functions involves interaction with the people in the organization and leads to communication. The important fact of organizational life for a manager is communication, and success will depend upon how effectively one can communicate with others in the organization. In other words, how successfully one can put ideas across to those who work with and thereby persuade others to work in the direction of the achievements of goals of the organization. Let us take a relevant example. What is our objective in preparing lessons like these? Simply stated, it is to put across your mind the essence of managerial functions and enable you to understand how these can be discharged effectively. In other words, We are trying to communicate to you the concepts of management, and whether we have been successful in meeting our objective will depend upon the extent to which you are able to understand what we are trying to communicate to you. Communication therefore aims at developing understanding. Communication process. The simplest model of the communication process can be understood as sender, message, and receiver. This model indicates that essential elements of communication, like the sender and the receiver, and the message that is exchanged between them. If any one of the three elements is missing, communication does not take place. However, the process of communication is a much more complex phenomenon consisting of at least 5 elements which are subjected to various influences. The first is source. The first element is the source of the communication from where the communication originates. The source or sender can be a person, a number of persons, or even a machine. The sender initiates communication because there is a need, thought, idea, or information that wishes to convey to the other person, persons, or machine. If, for example, an accidental fire has broken out in a part of godown of the factory, the security officer, who is a source, will need to convey the message immediately to the fire station, which is a receiver. Fire alarm, that is machine, will do the same as of the security officer. Next is encoding message. The next element in the process is that of encoding the information to be transmitted. Encoding enables the thoughts to be put in the form of symbols. Normally, language provides the symbols that are used in the transmission of thoughts to another person. However, language is not the only means to convey the thoughts, needs, or information. There are non-verbal means, for example gestures, which provide another form through which thoughts can be transmitted. The more complex the ideas, needs, or information to be communicated, the more complex becomes the process of encoding them. While an involuntary shriek may adequately convey the degree of alarm felt by the victim, even a carefully worded statement or letter may fail to convey the essential purpose of the communication. This can happen if the language or symbols used convey different meanings to the sender and the receiver. Encoding of the thoughts produces a message which can be either verbal or non-verbal. Verbal message is in the form of words and language, while non-verbal would be in the form of body gestures like wink, smile, grunt, frown, wave of hand, etc. Channel. The next element in the process of communication is the channel through which the communication is transmitted. It is the link that joins the sender and the receiver. The most commonly used channels are sight and sound. In the organizational environment, the channel could take the form of face-to-face conversations, written memos, telephonic exchanges, group meetings, etc. Outside the organization, the channels could be letters or circulars, magazines, radio programs, or TV shows, etc. For communication to be effective, the channel used should be appropriate for the message as well as the receiver. For an urgent message, mobile, telephone, or mail would be the appropriate channel. Again, the channel chosen would be influenced by the consideration as to whom the message is being directed. Decoding. Decoding and understanding the message constitute the last two elements in the process of communicating from sender to receiver. The receiver, in the first instance, receives the message and decodes it, that is to say, interprets and translates it into thoughts, understanding, and desired response. A successful communication occurs when the receiver decodes the message and attaches a meaning to it which very nearly approximates the idea, thoughts, or information the sender wished to transmit. Decoding and understanding are affected by several factors. For example, a receiver cannot decode a message which is in a language not known to him. This applies to symbols also. The same symbol may carry a different meaning to the receiver. Again, the receiver's past experience as well as his expectations color the meaning that is attached to the message. All this tends to bring about a divergence between the intended meaning and perceived meaning. In order that this does not happen, it is necessary to develop greater degree of homogeneity between the sender and the receiver, both of whom have their own fields of experience. The field of experience constitutes an individual's attitudes, experience, knowledge, environment, and socio-cultural background. The greater the overlap of the source and receiver's field of experience, the greater the probability of successful communication. In other words, they have things in common that facilitate better communication. An individual engaged in communication with another person of a significantly different educational or cultural background will have to put in greater effort to ensure successful communication. The greater the overlap of the two persons' field of experience, the higher is the probability of successful communication. Feedback. Response and feedback complete the two-way process of communication. It is through the feedback that the source or the sender comes to know if the message was correctly received and understood. In case it is found that the message has been received incorrectly, it is possible to make corrections subsequently if response is timely. Sender's efforts to communicate are aimed at eliciting the desired response. However, a communication may result in producing any of the three outcomes. A desired change may occur, an undesired change may occur, or no change may take place. We consider communication as successful only when it produces the desired response. Noise. Surrounding the entire spectrum of communication is the noise that affects the accuracy and fidelity of the message communicated. Noise is any factor that disturbs, confuses, or otherwise interferes with communication. It can arise at any stage in the communication process. The sender may not be able to encode the message properly, or the message may not be properly audible. The message may get distorted by other sounds in the environment. The receiver may not hear the message or comprehend it in a manner not entirely intended by the sender of the message. The channel also may create interference by filtering, that is, allowing some information to pass through and disallowing others. In any case, there is so much of noise or interference in the entire process that there is every possibility of the communication being distorted. We will discuss later in this unit why distortion takes place and what can be done to minimize the distortion of communication. Verbal and non-verbal communication. A communication in which words are used can be called verbal communication. Communication over long distance takes place usually through verbal communication. As an adjunct to this is the non-verbal communication, which refers to the use of body language in communicating ideas from the sender to the receiver. Non-verbal communication most often takes place unconsciously, and it may either fortify or supplement the verbal communication or may at times negate the very purpose of verbal communication. Let us examine each of these one by one. The main characteristics of verbal communication is the use of words, either written or spoken. Written communication includes personal letters, memoranda, policy and procedure manuals, and notices placed on the notice boards. Examples of oral communications are conferences, committee meetings, telephonic conversations, announcements, etc. Both written and oral communication have their merits and demerits. A written communication has the advantage of being easily verified and of being more precisely defined if there arises a need for subsequent correction. Spoken messages cannot always be verified so easily. Secondly, because a written communication is likely to be a permanent record, we are more particular in making it precise and accurate. Thirdly, lengthy and complicated messages are better understood if they are put in writing. It would be difficult to understand or retain a lengthy message if it were only in oral form. Together with these advantages, written communications have some drawbacks also. Some of these are: firstly, it is a slower method of communication if we consider the total amount of time involved from the formulation of idea by the sender to the understanding of the idea by the receiver. A written communication competes with all other written material that reaches the desk of an executive. As such, there can be a gap between the time when a communication reaches the manager's desk and the time when he reads it. Moreover, if clarifications are needed because the message is not clear to the receiver, further delay would take place. Secondly, despite the fact that a greater degree of preciseness is aimed at while preparing a written communication, there is always a possibility of ambiguity or lack of clarity creeping in, leading to misunderstanding on the part of the receiver. Clarifications naturally mean delay. Lastly, over-reliance on written communication can lead to too much of paperwork in the organization. This not only consumes time, money, and energy, but also indicates a lack of trust among the employees of the organization. It has been observed that when trust is low and suspicions are high in an organization, an over-reliance on written communication is likely to occur. Oral communication. Although an organization cannot function without written communication of various kinds, yet by far the greater percentage of information is communicated orally. It has been observed that managers spend 60 to 80% of their work time in oral communication. Oral communication has the merit of being more rapid. Generally, the spoken word is a quicker and less complicated way of getting one's ideas across another person. Again, it offers the potential of two-way information flow and therefore less probability of misunderstanding the communication. The creation of a less formal atmosphere and generation of fellow feelings are the additional advantages brought about through oral communication. However, the oral communication is not entirely free from defects. It is less effective as a means of presenting complicated and lengthy data. It is also subjected to misinterpretation and the effects of barriers arising from interpersonal relationships. Can you determine which of the two, oral or written, is a better means of communication? You will understand that the choice between the two is, generally speaking, determined by the situation. However, the use of both together will very often strengthen and reinforce a message. Take this case. The study material of IGNOU is the written communication which will be fortified subsequently through oral communication in contact classes or educational TV programs. The two together, we hope, will further increase your understanding of the concepts and application of management. Choosing your words. You have studied earlier that communication refers to the transmission of meaning from the sender to the receiver. Such transmission takes place through the use of symbols, whether verbal or non-verbal. In verbal communication, the symbol is a word. In order that the transmission of meaning takes place, it is important that the particular symbol or word used must create within the mind of the receiver the same image which was in the mind of the sender of the communication. It is only then that the basic purpose of communication, which is to influence the behavior of the receiver, will be achieved. It has been found that words do not necessarily have commonly understood meanings. The abstract words like participation or democracy or satisfactory suffer from the difficulty that different people are likely to attach different meanings to these words. The greater the use of such abstract words, the bigger the difficulty in bringing about an understanding of the message and a change in behavior through communication. Keith Davis, in his well-known book Human Behavior at Work, Organizational Behavior, has suggested a few guidelines for making verbal communication more effective. These are: number 1, use simple words and phrases. Number 2, use short and familiar words. Number 3, use personal pronouns such as you whenever appropriate. Number 4, give illustrations and examples. Number 5, use short sentences and paragraphs. Number 6, use active verbs such as the manager plans. Number 7, economize on adjectives. Number 8, express thoughts logically and in a direct way. And number 9, Avoid unnecessary words. Use of body language. In determining the effectiveness of communication in the sense of effecting a change in behavior, nonverbal communication has an important role to play. Experts in the field of human communication have found that in a typical message between two persons, only about 7% of the meaning or content of the message is carried by the actual words being used. Another 38% of the message is carried by one's tone of voice, which includes pacing, timing, pauses, accents, etc. The major part of 55% of the content of the message is in non-verbal form. In other words, it is in the form of our physical attitude going along with our verbal message. The physical attitude is also referred to as body language. Non-verbal communication can take place with our actions or with our body gestures. For example, a manager who pounds his fist on the table while announcing that from now on participative management will be practiced in his organization creates a credibility gap between what he says and what he practices. A manager who says that he believes in an open door policy for all his employees but is busy with his own files while an employee is giving him certain suggestions towards improvement in work environment is making non-verbal communication quite in conflict with his verbal communication. In such situations, the non-verbal message is the stronger one and the verbal message will cease to be effective. Body gestures that communicate may relate to your handshake, your smile, your eye contact, your posture while standing or sitting, your facial expression while listening, the shrug of your shoulders, indeed the movement of any part of your body. You must therefore be watchful of your body language so that it does not contradict your verbal message. This is indeed difficult because the body language is so involuntary that we are not even aware of it. Some of the non-verbal actions which assist communication include: Number 1. Maintaining eye contact. Number 2. Occasionally nodding the head in agreement. Number 3. Smiling and showing animation. Number 4. Leaning towards the speaker. Number 5. Speaking at a moderate rate in a quiet tone. Some of the non-verbal actions that impede the communication are: Number 1. Looking away or turning away from the speaker. Number 2. Sneering or using other contemptuous gestures. Number 3. Closing your eyes. Number 4. Using an unpleasant tone of voice. And number 5. Speaking too slow or too fast. Channels of communication. An organization structure provides channels for the flow of information on which the decisions of the organization will be based. As such, an organization can be described as the network of communication channels. These channels can be either intentionally designed or they may develop of their own accord. When a channel is intentionally prescribed for the flow of communication in the organization, we call it a formal channel, and the communication passing through that channel as formal communication. On the other hand, when communication takes place through channels not intentionally designed, in other words, outside the formal channels, such channels are referred to as informal channels and the communication as informal communication. Formal communication. An organization chart shows the direction of formal communication flow in an organization. It identifies the various transmitters and receivers and the channels through which they must communicate. The authority relationships indicate the direction of communication flow in an organization. A formal communication takes place between a superior and subordinate in the form of instructions and directions. Such a flow takes place in the downward direction. Another formal communication takes place between subordinate and superior when reporting on performance is made by the subordinate. Since the subordinate initiates communication to the superior, the flow is upward. We call this upward communication. The upward communication can take the form of progress reports, budget reports, profit and loss statements, requests for grants, etc. Again, formal communication may take place between one division of an organization and another. This could be either lateral or diagonal. There is substantial formal communication between production foreman and maintenance foreman, or between production manager and quality control manager. Formal communication may pass across organizational levels also. For example, communication between line and staff units takes place very frequently across organizational levels. Such communication helps tremendously in the coordination of activity. Finally, formal communication may also arise between the organization and outside parties. For example, suppliers, customers, government, etc. This may happen when the management is required to provide information on certain aspects of working of the organization. Communication of this kind is usually one way. Networks in formal communication. We have discussed earlier how the formal organizational structure prescribes the channels through which communication flows take place. These channels are designed to keep the flow of information in an orderly manner and to protect the higher level managers from an overload of unnecessary information. However, the way in which these channels are designed and work can affect the speed and accuracy of information as well as the task performance and satisfaction of members of the group. As such, managers have to think of how best to design the organizational structure and the communication network which meets the requirements of the situation. Some research in the design of communication networks has been carried out which indicates their relative merits for use in different situations. Although these networks can assume many forms, the most frequently discussed are four, known as the wheel, chain, Y, and circle. These forms can well be looked at as an organizational structure made up of 5 members. The circle network represents a 3-level hierarchy in which there is communication between superiors and subordinates with cross-communication at the operative level. The chain can represent a 5-level hierarchy in which communication can take place only upward and downward and across organizational lines. The wheel or star represents an administrator and 4 subordinates with whom he interacts. There is no interaction among the subordinates. In the Y network, 2 subordinates report to the superior. It may be regarded as a 4-level hierarchy. To test the effect of various communication structures, a series of experiments involving simple as well as complex problems were conducted. The studies demonstrated that network centrality was the critical feature that determined whether a particular communication pattern was effective and satisfying to the members for a particular type of task. An index of relative centrality was developed for this purpose in order to determine who occupied the central position in each network. It was found that Y and star networks are highly centralized, with C occupying the central position. The circle and chain networks were found to be decentralized, with no member being able to influence all other members. Further experiments to determine how performance and attitudes were affected by different communication networks showed that centralized networks performed faster and more accurately than decentralized networks, provided tasks were comparatively simple. For complex tasks, however, the decentralized networks were comparatively quicker and more accurate. The emergence of a leader and the satisfaction of group members was also affected by the centrality of networks. In centralized groups, whether the task was simple or complex, one person who occupied the central position by virtue of the control of information emerged as the leader. In decentralized networks, no one position could emerge as the leadership position. As far as the satisfaction of group members is concerned, it was found to be higher in decentralized networks in all types of tasks. Satisfaction was higher in the circle, highest in the chain, lower in Y, and the least in the star pattern. The reason for higher satisfaction in decentralized networks was that the members of those networks could participate in problem solving. These experiments have certain implications for the design of organizational structure and the communication network. Firstly, an organization with mostly routine, simple tasks is likely to work more efficiently with a formally centralized network of communication, while more complicated tasks would require decentralized networks. Secondly, The problem-solving objectives of speed and flexibility cannot be achieved by the same pattern of communication. Rather, speed in problem-solving can be achieved at the expense of flexibility and vice versa. As such, the communication pattern should be designed with reference to the objective that is regarded as most important. Thirdly, the pattern that leads to highest average morale and greatest flexibility in adapting to changed conditions is the one in which there are a large number of active participants in decision-making process. Lastly, access to information is an important source of power in organizations. We were so far explaining to you the communication patterns that are used for formal communication in an organization. You are, of course, aware that along the formal organization exists another organization known as informal organization, which has its own channels for communication. Further in the unit, we shall discuss informal communication and its channels. Informal communication. Communication that takes place without following the formal lines of communication is said to be informal communication. This channel is not created by management and is usually not under the control of management. An informal system of communication is generally referred to as the grapevine because it spreads throughout the organization with its branches going out in all directions in utter disregard of the levels of authority and linking members of the organization in any direction. The informal communication arises as a result of employee needs for information which are not met by the formal channels. It has been observed that problems relating to work and unfavorable reactions to various organizational practices are transmitted through informal communication. Since the channels are flexible and establish contacts at personal levels among members of organization at different hierarchical levels, the grapevine spreads information faster than the formal system of communication. As has been pointed out in the unit on planning and organizing, about 10 to 40% of employees receive information or misinformation about the organization and its members through informal channels of communication. In contrast to the formal communication, which moves on slowly from one person at one hierarchical level to another at the next hierarchical level, the grapevine transmits information from one person to a group of persons much more rapidly in a cluster chain arrangement. The cluster chain is made up of individuals who act as information sources. Each individual passes the information to several others, some of whom repeat the message to others. Some of those who receive the message may not pass on the information to others, but the information may lead to a change in their thinking on the subject and may sometimes affect their behavior as well. Though it has been found that informal communication carries accurate information about 3/4 of time, yet there are strong possibilities of its communication being distorted. This happens because of the policies of filtering, whereby each member of the cluster chain, acting as a kind of filter, passes on only that part of communication which he regards as important. The receiver is left to fill in the gaps and complete the story according to his own imagination. This naturally leads to a very great distortion of the real situation and may at times cause serious problems in the organization. The characteristics of grapevine have been summarized by Keith Davis as: Number 1. People talk most when the news is recent. Number 2. People talk about things that affect their work. Number 3. People talk about people they know. Number 4. People working near each other are likely to be on the same grapevine. And number 5. People who contact each other in the chain of procedure tend to be on the same grapevine. You have now understood that the grapevine is a fast and a substantially accurate channel of communication. It has tremendous capacity to carry information both helpful and harmful to the formal organization. In most cases, it carries information which the formal channel may not or will not carry. The manager's responsibility, therefore, lies in utilizing the positive aspects of the informal channels of communication and in minimizing the negative aspects of this channel. In order to do this, What the manager can do is to identify the members of the organization who usually seek and spread information. It is possible that different individuals are active at different times, but usually it will be found that some individuals tend to be more active carriers of information than the others. After identifying such people, a manager can use them as sounding boards. If it is discovered that misleading rumors are circulating, it may be a desirable policy on the part of the manager to release the official information in order to clarify the situation. At times, management may even find the informal communication channel more useful in transmitting information than the formal channel. A common method of using informal communication is by planned leaks or strategically planned just between you and me remarks, which would obviously reach all parts of the organization much more quickly than any kind of communication through formal channels.
You were listening to the audiobook by the School of Management Studies, IGNOU, for MBA program. Course code MMPC-001, Management Functions and Organizational Processes. Course Coordinator, Professor Srilata, School of Management Studies, IGNOU. Voice over by Harpreet Kaur. Edited by Tarannum Jahan. Program assisted by Jagbandhu Jana. Program produced by Manoj Kumar Singh. This program was brought to you by Electronic Media Production Center of Indira Gandhi National Open University.